The Sovereign Citizen by Judge Dale, retired. Thursday, April 11, 2013. Our federal government has instructed our federal, state, and local police agencies that everyone who purports to be a sovereign should be treated as a terrorist. They have also brainwashed the American public into believing that being a sovereign is anti-American and unpatriotic. Perhaps this is the pot calling the kettle black. What is sovereignty? It is the inherent right and prerogative of a civilized people to rule itself and to dictate all the forms and conditions of the institutions it sets up to carry out this rule. Once again, I took the time to do some research on this sovereignty. I've been researching it for a long time. When you go back and look at a lot of old citations, it is very clear that the people are sovereign. I found a Georgetown law review that was written by a law professor. His name is Randy E. Barnett. I had made a video on this. I actually took the time to actually make a video like in a movie type form from this. This is something that everybody should read. It goes back to what I was saying. These law professors are questioning a lot of the things that we say. And you can see right here in the introduction where it says right here, constitutional law professors know two things that their students often do not. John Marshall was not the first Chief Justice of the United States, and Marbury versus Madison was not the first great constitutional case decided by the Supreme Court. That honor goes to Chisholm versus Georgia, decided some 10 years earlier when John Jay was Chief Justice. Students may be unaware of these facts because most basic courses in constitutional law begin with Marbury, which, along with Chief Justice Marshall's opinion in McCulloch versus Maryland and Gibbons versus Ogden, are the earliest cases that are emphasized. The opinions in Chisholm are never read. At most, the case is mentioned in passing to explain the origin of the 11th Amendment, which reversed its holding. In Chisholm, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 4-1, rejected Georgia's assertion of sovereign immunity as a defense against a suit in federal court for breach of contract brought against it by a citizen of another state. The fundamental nature of the issue presented by the case was aptly characterized by Justice Wilson. This is a case of uncommon magnitude. One of the parties to it is a state, certainly respectable, claiming to be sovereign. The question to be determined is whether this state, so respectable and whose claims soar so high, is amendable to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court of the United States. This question, important in itself, will depend on others. More important still, and may perhaps be ultimately resolved into one, no less radical than this: do the people of the United States form a nation? And it goes on, it says, in Chisholm, the justices of the Supreme Court rejected Georgia's claim to be sovereign. They concluded instead that, to the extent the term sovereignty is even appropriately applied to the newly adopted Constitution, sovereignty rested with the people rather than with state governments. So right here, you can see very clearly in this case, Chisholm versus Georgia, it was very clear at the onset that everybody understood that the people were sovereign. Now, they have coined this new phrase called sovereign citizen to try to make people look like idiots. I've read case law and everything where this is very clear that the people are sovereign. This case that came afterward, this is where you start, where they talk about conspiracy theories and things like that. But it was in Marbury versus Madison and McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, where it started to change, that they started to get this notion. But the confusion comes in because you got to understand what United States of America means and United States, which I'm going to show you later in this video in some of the debates that was on the congressional floor, that it is very clear that the United States is a corporation. It's going to be without question. So you can throw this in these people's face and show them. Next time you try to make jokes and make videos on the internet and so forth, trying to throw around this word sovereign citizen, which is an oxymoron. How a sovereign go, there's no sovereign citizen. And they always spell it with a small c. If you look before the 14th Amendment, citizen was written with a capital C, and after the 14th Amendment is written with a small c. The difference between a proper noun and a common noun. And this was because the 14th Amendment allowed corporations to be citizens. So check that out and read this. It's in the description. The link to it is in the description. The link to it is in the description. I would highly recommend. That you read this Virginia Law Review. Ironically, the U.S. Supreme Court agrees with those people who claim to be sovereign citizens of the American Republic. Bond versus United States, Volume 529, United States Reporter, page 334, the year 2000. The Supreme Court held that the American people are in fact sovereign and not the states or the government. The court went on to define that local, state, and federal law enforcement officers were committing unlawful actions against the sovereign people by the enforcement of the laws and are personally liable for their actions. Bond versus United States, Volume 529, U.S. Reporter, page 334, 2000. Supreme Court, cited by 761 litigants in other cases. Bond versus United States, Volume 131, Supreme Court Reporter, page 2355, the year 2011. Supreme Court, cited by 306. Bond versus United States, Volume 1, Federal Supplement, 3rd Series, page 631, year 1993, Court of Appeals, 7th, cited by 66. What are the implications of this 2000 U.S. Supreme Court ruling? Number 1. The delegates to the First Federal Convention prohibited the use of corporations by all governments representing the American Republic. Therefore, all of these corporate governments and their corporate laws are a usurpation of the organic Constitution of the United States of America. All state governments are now subcorporations of the federal government, making all courts and all law enforcement personnel corporate federal agencies or employees. See James Madison Journal on the Federal Convention, Volume 2, page 722. I took the time to investigate the records of the Federal Convention of 1787, Volume 2, and it was very, very interesting. I recommend everyone read it. I provided a link down in the description to this particular document. It was essentially the debates on the congressional floor when the Constitution was aborting at its inception, of what exactly would go into the Constitution, of the debates over the different clauses of the Constitution and so forth. And I found some really interesting things. I'm still researching it, but I found something that should put to rest anyone who just does not believe that the United States is a corporation. If you just still don't think that the United States is a corporation, here on page 263, we find the United States shall be forever considered as one body corporate and politic in law, and entitled to all the rights, privileges, and immunities which to bodies corporate do or ought to appertain. And I went and got a 4th edition Black's Law Dictionary and looked up the definition of the word body corporate. And here you can see very clearly that it says a corporation, public or private. It is a corporation, public or private, a body corporate. And there's a lot of discussions in here of what the rights are about the United States. There's definitely a distinction all through here of United States and states. There's discussions about treason. What shall be treason against the United States? If somebody's treason, it's going to be treason against the state or the United States. These people understood what United States mean. It is very clear in these discussions that they understood that the state and the United States were two separate things. They were two separate entities, not United States of America. That's a totally different thing. It is United States, and then there is the states, and then there's United States of America, which involves all 50 states, the continental 50 states acting together in concert. So this notion that the United States is not a corporation, if you look into these documents that he's talking about. It's very clear. It's very clear. And pull up your state code on your PC and search the code for the words District of Columbia and federal government. You'll receive about 1,000 references linking your state to the federal government. Number 2, the state and federal government is a corporation, and therefore the Congress, state legislatures, city councils, municipalities, and all state and federal courts are corporate entities posing as constitutional branches of government.
Okay, Shirley, we're looking at this. It's addressed to John Andes.
I won't go do that. Oh.
What's important that we notice here?
Okay, first of all, we're talking about the Courthouse Corporation. And if you notice, Farrell happens to be a judge. Right here, we're talking about the Courthouse Corporation. The same thing you'll see, that it is a private corporation.
The courthouse is a private corporation.
Private corporation.
This is dated 1985.
Right, but it's been going on since 1984. So it is a private corporation, and this is where they float bonds, building courthouses without the approval of the citizens.
These are all the different courthouses and the amount of money. There was no citizen approval for all these.
Right, and it makes it owned by the judges and not the people. I'm going to show you why. As I said before, this is the Courthouse Corporation. And here's the bonds that they've been floating, right here. This is one of the bonds that they floated. But I would
The obligation of the county to pay base rental payments does not constitute.
In other words, what they do, they build these courthouses and then they pay rent on the same courthouse that they just built. And this is showing the payment schedule on this courthouse. And here
Whoa! We're talking millions and millions of dollars a year in rental payments.
And rental payments. Wait a minute. And you see Antonovich here. He is appointing Farrell, which we saw back here earlier.
Wait.
Corporation that was created in 1984, and they use this corporation to float bonds without voter approval. Anything that's private, they don't have to notify the public, but when it's public, so this is how they get around. They create these private corporations.
Number 3, corporations are privately owned businesses, meaning that the corporate United States belongs to one or more private individuals, which is always governed by a board of directors. The corporate United States is privately owned by a group of European royal and elite individuals tied to the Federal Reserve System, and the letters of incorporation are recorded in the Vatican. The President of the United States is actually the CEO of the United States, and the Congress and all other are corporate employees. Everything they do is in the interest of the corporate owners. I can't access those documents because of national security. Number 4, in order to promulgate and enforce criminal laws to govern the sovereign public, government must be sovereign too, which is an accepted rule of law derived from the ancient law of kings. Corporations are not and can never be sovereign. They are not real. They are a fiction and only exist on paper. Number 5, therefore, all laws created by these government corporations are private corporate regulations called public law, statutes, codes, and ordinances to conceal their true nature. Do the judge and your lawyer know about this? You bet they do. Number 6, since these government bodies are not sovereign, they cannot promulgate or enforce criminal laws. They can only create and enforce civil laws, which are duty-bound to comply with the law of contracts. The law of contracts requires signed written agreements and complete transparency. Did you ever agree to be arrested and tried under any of their corporate statutes? For that matter, did you ever agree to contract with them by agreeing to be sued for violating their corporate regulations? Citations and complaints are contracts, but they lack transparency because you were never told what might happen to you if you agreed to contract, and that you had a right to refuse the accommodation. Number 7, do any of America's courts have jurisdiction over a sovereign? Yes, but only by your consent to be judged by the court. Can they compel, summon, or subpoena you to appear or participate in their process? No, they can't compel you, and yes, they can ask, but you can reject the accommodation in writing, and nothing can be done about it because you have refused to give the court jurisdiction over you. Number 8, enforcement of these corporate statutes by local, state, and federal law enforcement officers are unlawful actions being committed against the sovereign public, and these officers can be held personally liable for their actions. Bank versus United States, Volume 529, U.S. Reporter, page 334, year 2000. Number 9, there being no constitutional criminal laws or transparency in the American justice system, everyone arrested, convicted, and sentenced to prison under these civil laws are imprisoned by consent, and therein all American jails are actually debtors' prisons. Number 10, most of the county and state prisons and all of the federal prisons are privately owned corporate businesses for profit, which kick back to the sentencing judges. The Bureau of Prisons Privatization Management Branch provides general oversight for these institutions. So if you're convicted in these courts, you can expect to serve some jail time. Now you know why America has such high prison populations. Number 11, can the state government and courts take custody of your children? Only with your consent. Otherwise, their agents and officers can be held personally liable for their actions. Orphans are a different matter and can become wards of the court until emancipated. Corporate governments are a usurpation of the organic American Constitution, and this corporatist onslaught in America has since its creation been an anti-sovereign and terrorist regime, and are in fact the real terrorists and traitors to the American Republic. Blessings, Judge Dale, retired.